Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the World Climate News. Plastic is unpopular these days. Whereas plastic used to be normal material that made an incredible number of things easier, today plastic is considered the ugly duckling among materials. Wherever possible, wood or metal is preferred. However, for most people and for governments, it is not even a question of things like durability, health hazards, or aesthetic value, but something completely different: environmental and climate protection. My generation was significantly shaped by the fight against plastic. Almost every day we saw and see images from the sea. Fish that had become entangled in six-pack rings and died, or gigantic amounts of plastic floating through the seas or washed up on the beach. At that time, plastic waste became the media counterpart to the melting polar ice caps and the drowning polar bears. Unlike the polar bears, however, which are doing quite well, plastic indeed is a big problem. There are now around 3 million tons of plastic waste in the sea, and hundreds, if not thousands, of associations, NGOs, and politicians have recognized the problem and are fighting against our plastic waste. If only it were that simple. In most articles and reports, the question of where plastic waste actually comes from is not even addressed. It is always presented in such a way that we have to separate better, create less waste, live cleaner, to combat the plastic catastrophe in the world's oceans. But we, that is, Germany and the West, actually have no influence on this. In 2015, a large-scale study was published for the first time that examined which rivers wash how much plastic into the world's oceans. The 20 rivers that transport the most plastic waste are all in Asia, Africa, and South America. Not only that, of the 122 rivers with the most plastic, 103 were in Asia, 8 in Africa, and 8 in South and Central America. Only one European river, the Danube, was represented and not a single North American one. According to the scientists' calculations, these 122 rivers were responsible for more than 90% of the plastic in the world's oceans. A second study in 2021 confirmed the result. 81% of plastic waste in the world's oceans comes from Asia, 8% from Africa, and 9% from America. Europe was only responsible for 0.6%. Here you can see the top polluters listed again. Philippines at 36.4%, India at around 13%, Malaysia at 7.5%, China 7.2%, Indonesia 5.7%, Brazil 3.9%, Vietnam 2.9%, Bangladesh 2.5%, Thailand at 2.3%, Nigeria at 1.9%, Turkey 1.5%, Cameroon 1.1%. And as you can see, not a single Western country is among the top places. The USA comes in at some point with a share of just 0.25%. Germany, like most European countries, is not responsible for a significant amount of plastic. The study authors estimate the share at 0.01%. But environmental and climate activists are not stupid, and as with carbon dioxide, they will not accept the idea that the West is not responsible when it comes to pollution or emissions. So instead of pointing the finger at emerging or third world countries, somehow the disaster has to be seen as coming from the evil West. With carbon dioxide, this is done by setting the completely ludicrous value of carbon dioxide per capita, or by referring to the historical CO2 that the West has emitted in the past. But the typical argument when it comes to waste is different. It is our waste that is exported and then incinerated abroad or thrown into the rivers. A masterpiece of the smokescreen strategy can be observed on the German news portal MDR. To do that, we have to go to the article. Scientists at the Leipzig Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research found almost 3 years ago that 90% of plastic waste in the world's oceans gets there through 10 major rivers. 8 of these 10 rivers are in Asia. So are the countries of Southeast Asia the big environmental sinners while the rest of the world recycles in an exemplary manner? A new study from Ireland suggests the opposite. According to this study, much of the plastic carried into the sea by rivers actually comes from Europe. European countries simply export some of their waste to Asia instead of recycling it or disposing of it. The manipulation already begins with this sentence. According to this study, much of the plastic carried into the sea by rivers actually comes from Europe. Much of this, then, but how much? But it goes on. In the journal Environmental International, the scientists George Bishop and David Stiles report that, according to trade data, 46% of all sorted plastic waste is exported from the European countries that produced it. Much of it goes to the countries of Southeast Asia, where recycling and disposal systems are often underdeveloped. There, the garbage ends up in overcrowded landfills. From there, it enters the rivers and finally the sea. The percentage for European countries is also addressed. 46% of our plastic waste is exported. To the inexperienced reader, this seems like a lot. In their calculations, the scientists have distinguished between worst case and best case scenarios. According to these, between 1 and 7% of all exported PETs entered the oceans as microplastics in 2017. This corresponds to between 32,000 and 180,000 tons of plastic waste. 32,000 to 180,000 tons, that sounds like an unimaginable amount. But this figure, firstly, refers to the whole of Europe, and secondly, is very low considering the annual new plastic pollution of 10 million tons. Just 0.32 to 1.8% of the new pollution would be caused by Europe, and wrongly attributed to Asia. Broken down to Germany, we would be in the range of 0.032 to 0.18% of German waste entering the world's oceans via Asia. Unfortunately, it is not possible to say exactly what Germany's actual share is, as the study is no longer available. All these figures are of course kept secret at the news outlet MDR, and it is deliberately presented in such a way that we simply dump our garbage in Asia and then it pollutes the oceans via these countries. Asia is then wrongly suspected of being an environmental polluter. China alone flushes an estimated 3.5 million tons of plastic waste into the sea every year. In contrast, 18,000 tons of German plastic are said to enter the ocean via Asia, a share of 0.5%. In fact, this means that after 2 days, China has put more of its own plastic into the sea than Germany has put into Asian countries in an entire year. But it should be clear to most people anyway that the environmental and climate protectors have long since lost interest in facts. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. If you'd like to support us, information for donation can be found in the video description box down below.